I'm grateful that I had 17 days. How she shaped not only my 3 kids, but she shaped me. And I think I would have let go of her hand an hour sooner. She said, instead of going to dinner and a movie, I kind of have a stomach ache. I think I'd like to go to the clinic, make sure I don't have the stomach flu. Went to the emergency room, and the entire time we talked about where we could still get dinner reservations. And a couple hours later, after x-rays and MRI and CAT scan, the nurse walks in, turns the TV off and sits down, has some papers in her hand, and without missing a breath, she looks at us and says, "You have cancer." And just like that, our entire worlds were flipped upside down, but the immediate thought was, we'll fight it. And as soon as we said those words aloud, the nurse looked at us and says, "The tumors in your abdomen are innumerable. We can't even count how many tumors there are." Day 7, which was probably the hardest for me, I believe that was March 1st. That was our anniversary in the hospital. Day 17 just felt different. I came downstairs early in the morning and just sat next to her bed, and I held her hand. I wanted to stay by her side the entire day, and I held her hand the entire day. At about 10:50 p.m., I was in a chair next to her bed, and I let her hand go. And at 10:54, my daughter Jasmine sits up in her chair, gasps, and says, "Dad, is she okay?" And I looked at her, and I could tell she had stopped breathing. She loved me that much that she wouldn't die if I was holding her hand.
Shane Musgrove, welcome to the Roller Coaster Podcast.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being on. Shane, I want you to share in detail the events of March 13th of 2022, and I want you to share from the time that you woke up that day to the time that you went to bed.
Sure. Actually, if I can start with February 24th,
Okay.
That's maybe a better starting place for me.
Okay.
I was in Las Vegas. I worked for a multi-billion-dollar corporation, was a regional person managing multiple states, which had me on the road quite often, every other week, 3 or 4 days a week was not uncommon. I woke up in a hotel in Las Vegas. It was a Thursday morning, excited to come home. Me and my wife, Sonia, actually had plans to visit our son, Caden, who was a baseball player in Texas at Mary Hardin-Baylor. We had plans to visit him on, I think we were leaving on Friday or Saturday that weekend. I flew home. I greet my wife as I would any other time coming home. She was in our home office, and we talked about our trip. There was some weather in Texas, some sleet and snow that were kind of potentially going to postpone our trip. So we talked about that, and then we decided to go to dinner and a movie that night. Nothing uncommon. It was 2 of our favorite pastimes as almost empty nesters. That's what we did almost every week. And so as we planned that, she finished up in her office, and a few hours later she came out. I was sitting on the couch, and she said, instead of going to dinner and a movie, I kind of have a stomach ache. I think I'd like to go to the clinic, make sure I don't have the stomach flu instead. And I said, sure, babe, we can do whatever you want, and maybe grab dinner afterwards. And we went to a grocery store, Fry's. Inside, they had a local clinic, the Minute Clinic or something of that nature. And we went. About 20 minutes later, the nurse comes out, and she's talking to me and Sonia, and she says, I'm just not sure, but something else is going on, and I think you should go to the emergency room. And we both looked at each other and kind of giggled and thought, the emergency room for a stomach ache? It's the stomach flu. Why are you sending us to the emergency room? And we didn't hesitate. We went to the emergency room, and the entire time we talked about where we could still get dinner reservations. The Keg, a local steak restaurant, was open until 10
Great
p.m.
spot,
And we thought, well, we can go there. And a couple hours later, after x-rays and MRI and CAT scan, we're sitting in this little room with the curtain drawn, watching a 12-inch television set, and the nurse walks in, turns the TV off and sits down, has some papers in her hand, and without missing a breath, she looks at us and says, "You have cancer." And just like that, our entire worlds were flipped upside down. But the immediate thought was, we'll fight it. I looked at my wife's eyes and I knew she was a fighter. And we thought, yeah, this is a challenge, but we're in it together and we'll fight it. And as soon as we said those words aloud, the nurse looked at us and says, the tumors in your abdomen are innumerable. We can't even count how many tumors there are. We're going to admit you for the night. So we thought, okay, we're not sure what that means, but we'll still keep positive and fight it. And maybe it's a misdiagnosis. We'll hear the results the next day. So they admit her on Thursday night. And that was almost the end of the day. I unfortunately didn't stay with her Thursday night. I had some dogs to take care of at home and make sure the house was situated. And the one thing, of course, I remember the entire day. But one of the things that continues to stick out to me is it was probably 2:30 a.m. Arizona time when I left the hospital to go home, and I needed to get it off my chest. I still hadn't processed what had been said. I didn't understand what had been said. So I called my best friend who lived in Michigan. It was probably 4:30 a.m. his time. And without hesitation, he picked up the phone, and I couldn't even breathe. I couldn't speak. I didn't say a word, and he knew something was up. And after about 30 minutes on the phone, I was able to get those words out for the first time that I had vocalized it and said, Sonia has cancer. And that takes us to the end of the night on Thursday, February 24th.
I think a lot of people who discover that they have this horrific diagnosis either they're able to do something about it and God forbid beat it. This was the case of my mother, for example. Or B, they have time. They have a little bit of time, and it might be a year, might even be 6 months, might be a couple years if you're really lucky. But your case was quite a bit different. I think it's one of the things that makes it so insane is I remember seeing your post on Facebook where you announced that she had this. I don't know if it was the next day or a couple days later. And it felt like before you knew it, she was gone. And so what's the next 2 weeks look like as we kind of lead up to that day?
Sure. So Friday morning, bright and early, I'm back at the hospital. Friday was full of tests. We met with the oncologist. We met with other specialists. They were doing a biopsy. They were doing more MRIs. At this point, it was a big waiting game. Sonia still felt good. She walked into the hospital on that Thursday. She was out of bed. She was walking around on Friday. Everything other than the cancer diagnosis was fairly normal, which gave us a lot of hope. Yeah. We knew that innumerous tumors in her abdomen didn't sound good, but we still had a glimmer of hope that there's a biopsy coming, there's a misdiagnosis, we can fight it. It may be years, it may be a year, it may be months, who knows at this point, but we still had some glimmer of hope. That Friday, Saturday, and Sunday was a lot of waiting. So unfortunately, the oncologist wasn't working on Saturday and Sunday. The biopsy results hadn't come in until Monday. So that left us alone in the hospital. Not a lot of family around at that point. We did tell our oldest daughter the day after, who was an adult, the day after. We didn't tell our youngest daughter, who was a junior in high school, a 16-year-old, until that Sunday because she was out of town for a cheer competition. We told her on Sunday when she had returned. So other than that, there wasn't a lot of family around. So it was a lot of me and Sonia in a room waiting, contemplating what was going to happen, when it was going to happen. Monday is when things really escalated. So Monday, we get the results from the biopsy, and it comes back that it was a very small lump in her breast that had metastasized. And it had metastasized to her lymph nodes, to her abdomen, to her chest cavity, to her spine, to her hips, to her bone, to her liver, pretty much throughout her entire body. And the oncologist said, we can't even count the amount of tumors that are throughout her body. And on Monday, they said, we think she has months to live and we'll do everything we can to fight it. But at that point, it's months. So we started putting a plan together. How do we get through the next couple months? Do we need to notify family? When do we notify family? Sonia was a little bit stubborn, so she wanted to wait before we notified everybody. She didn't want 50 people around in a hospital room or in a house. And at this point, we were still in the hospital, so it was day by day. After Monday, Tuesday, which was day 6, things started to escalate and turn for the worse. She actually started to have some minor hallucinations, which was caused due to the liver failure, the cancer in her liver. And once that happened, it happened very, very quickly. And the hallucinations came fast and they were bad, and we could kind of see there was a turn for the worst. I think it was day 6 that the oncologist actually said, I may have been wrong with my diagnosis, and months is not the right word. It's more like weeks, and we need to contact our family immediately. So we started doing just that. We had her father, her sisters, our son came home from college. We notified everybody. We got him home, and it was day 7, which was probably the hardest for me. I believe that was March 1st. That was our anniversary in the hospital. So we actually celebrated our 22nd wedding anniversary in a hospital room. I couldn't go to dinner like we usually do. Could have got her a nice gift, but it would have fell on empty ears. She got some balloons and a Starbucks drink from me, but that was about the extent of it on our anniversary.
Were you at Banner by chance?
We were at Gilbert Mercy.
So March 1st of 2022 was also the day I found out my wife was going to die. It's crazy to think that I didn't put the pieces together until you said that date, and then I went, wait a minute. It's the same day. And obviously my wife made it through all this, but yeah, you and I don't know if we're kindred spirits or what it is, but just the irony of the fact that your hardest day was the hardest day of my life as well. So a week in or so, she starts having these hallucinations, and it's clear that she doesn't have a lot of time. How do you tell the kids? I mean,
she actually told our oldest daughter, who lives in Gilbert near us. She told her on Friday, day 2. And I wasn't part of that conversation, but I was there in the hospital room. And at this point, we didn't know how long. We just knew it was cancer.
Yeah.
And that was hard, just being in the room with my adult daughter, knowing what her mom means to her. At that point, my adult daughter hadn't been married yet. She hadn't had her first baby yet, which is my first grandchild, which would have been my wife's first grandchild. There were a lot of things that if Sonia was gone, that her and my daughter would have missed out on. Our youngest daughter was in California at the time, as I said. We wanted to wait until she came back on that Sunday. And she knew the entire weekend, kids these days, they have Life 360 and Snap Maps and Google Maps, and she knew exactly where we were. As soon as we went to the hospital, she knew we were in the hospital. We just said, hey, it's precautionary. It's a stomach ache. They're checking her in to run some tests. I don't know if she bought it or not, but on Sunday when she came home, that was extremely hard to tell her, to get her up to the hospital and have her with us. My son, who was the farthest away in Texas at the time, he was a mama's boy, and parents never play favorites, but if I had to pick, I swear he was Sonia's favorite. They just had this special bond, this connection. And for whatever reason, she did not want to tell him the diagnosis. She didn't want him to know anything. And it was on our anniversary that I finally told him. But days prior, even leading up until that day, me and Sonia argued about whether I tell him or not. And I have on one shoulder the nurses chirping in my ear saying, you need to notify all of your family. It's going to be weeks. And then I have Sonia and her wishes saying, don't tell my son. And that was really tough because in my heart, I knew that, I had 17 days from date of diagnosis to death. My oldest daughter had 16. My youngest daughter had 14. I was taking precious days away from my son by not telling him. And Sonia didn't realize that. She didn't understand it, or she didn't want to believe it, whatever it was at that point. Yeah. So on our anniversary is the date that I called him, and that was extremely hard. There's actually a great story surrounding that. So I told you he was playing baseball in college at Mary Hardin Baylor. I called the coach the day before and I said, Coach, when I dropped him off in Texas, you told me you'd always have his back no matter what, on and off the field. And he said, absolutely, Shane, I do. And I told the coach, and the coach set up the next day to have him in his office, surrounded by his best friends on the team. When he was told the news on me by the phone, he already had a plan to get him a ride an hour away to the airport, got him on a plane. We picked him up and brought him in. So, outside of the diagnosis of your wife, looking at your kids, which are the most important things in your world, and telling them that their mother is going to pass away, it's unfathomable. I don't wish that on anybody. And honestly, I don't know how I did it and how I got through it.
Yeah, I remember just having some of those, having those same thoughts on how am I going to tell the kids, and that's one of the worst feelings ever as a father, is figuring out how you're going to do that, So March 13th, you wake up and what happens?
March 13th was a little different. So if I can back up a little bit, we stopped on about day 7. Day 7, she had her first chemotherapy in the hospital. The nurses told me they wanted a more targeted chemotherapy, but it was ridiculously expensive and my insurance wouldn't cover it unless she was not admitted in the hospital. So we had a plan to check her out of the hospital on day 8, literally drive her across the street to a cancer treatment center where she'd get more targeted chemo. Day 8, we had a really good friend, Dina Mackey. She was amazing. She's a nurse. She was with us by our side almost the entire time. She went to that appointment with us, and my wife almost didn't make it through that appointment. She was sitting in a wheelchair. They went to administer the chemo. She wouldn't wake up. She was pale. She was jaundiced. She was losing weight. And the lady administering the chemo said, we can't do this. Your wife won't make it through chemo. And Sonia woke up out of a dead sleep and said, you're giving me this chemo. This is the only chance I have. You're giving it to me. And, 3 hours of sitting there with her while we went through this was painful. But after that, we set up a hospital room in our house. She came home. Some great days, some bad days. This morning, as I prepared for this interview, I was actually going through old pictures, and day 15 was amazing. She was in a wheelchair. We were out of the house in the backyard taking photos with family. She ate dinner outside. We washed her hair. It was great. Day 16 was completely opposite. She slept most of the day. Her urine output was low. Jaundice was really, really bad. Her breathing was starting to take a turn. Day 17, it was a Sunday, and it just felt different. When I woke up, I didn't shower. I didn't shave. I came downstairs early in the morning and just sat next to her bed, and I held her hand. Our nurse, Dina, our friend and our nurse, Dina, was there the entire day. She didn't say much. We did have some last words between me and her, which were very important, but it was very limited on her side. We had done that a few days prior. So very limited conversation on day 17. And I remember sitting there with people in and out of the room. Her father was in and out of the room, my son, both of my daughters, her sisters. but I never really left her side. I mean, of course, I'd go to the kitchen for food or something, but I wanted to stay by her side the entire day. And I held her hand the entire day. And at about 10:50 p.m., I was in a chair next to her bed, and I let her hand go. And I'll never forget that. I let her hand go. Her father was sitting on the other side of the bed, and my oldest daughter was sitting at the foot of the bed. And at 10:54 p.m., my daughter Jasmine sits up in her chair, looks at her mom, gasps, and says, "Dad, is she okay?" And I looked at her, and I could tell she had stopped breathing. And we summoned for the nurse. Dina came in and pronounced her dead at 10:54 p.m.
And there's not that this would have changed maybe the outcome here, right? But you talked about this moment that you had where you let go of her hand, and shortly after she went. Do you feel like it was, in her mind, you giving her permission to go?
So I've thought a lot about that, and I realized that I was a little selfish in that moment and the entire day. As I said, I knew the entire day just felt different. And for me, I wanted to hold my wife's hand as she went. With the family, we had a lot of discussion about what the day was going to look like that she passed, what we were going to do after she passed, how we were going to react, how we weren't going to react.
Yeah.
And personally, I thought holding her hand, I wanted to be the one holding her hand as she went. And literally for two and a half years after the fact, I still think about that. I thought about it this morning. And I truly think that me letting go of her hand to lean back in the chair and stretch was me giving her permission to say it's okay. She was hanging on because I was holding her hand. She loved me that much that she wouldn't die if I was holding her hand.
Yeah. Yeah, just the amount of human connection is so powerful. Touch and words, and I have a very similar experience that ironically was happening right around the same time as you, where I was traveling as well. There's a lot of similarities in our story, and I eventually get to the hospital, and I had gotten news. I was convinced that she was gone. And when I left on the trip 2 days earlier, she was perfectly healthy, right? So it was a very sudden thing. And I remember walking into the hospital room, which I'm not sure how Mercy was, but there was COVID restrictions. So you had to be there before 7, only one family member. They gave us an exception to have a couple. And I remember walking in the room and sitting by her bed, and she was in a state of comatosis, was really rough shape. And I looked at her dad, who was the only other person in the room, and I just said, "Hey, how's she doing?" And she ended up right after having this intense seizure-like reaction, and I had to run in the hall and pull in doctors and nurses, and they're hooking her up to all kinds of machines and IVs, and they get her stable. And I remember a few days later, when she started communicating again, I asked her about that seizure. I said, "What happened there?" And she said, "When I heard your voice, it gave me life." And it's true, man. Like that, a connection specifically to a spouse is like the fact that you could have kept her for a moment on the other side of the veil is just amazing, And the
Sure.
fact that I was able to kind of pull her through just to say, hey, I'm here now, it's powerful.
Yeah. And at that point, the veil was very, very thin. So day 17, I'll never forget her last words to me. And she had some words after the fact that, weren't her. But her last words to me were, she called me daddy. Her last words to me were, I love you, daddy. But just hours before that, sitting by her side in silence, the house was quiet. 3 things that she said in her, and you got to understand, her breathing was very labored. She was raspy. You could barely understand if she did say anything, but I was sitting right next to her, and she said 3 things within about an hour of each other, a few hours before she passed. And she said, Grandma, speaking of, I'm assuming her grandma who had already passed before her, she said, it's beautiful. And she said, I'm already home.
That's got to provide some level of comfort to you, hopefully.
Yeah, it did. And as tragic as this was, listen, everybody faces tragedy. You've had something very similar happen. Every one of your listeners have had something tragic happen in their life. And if they haven't, I'm certain that they will. Yeah. Everybody's tragedy is a little different.
Yeah.
I take some peace and some solace in knowing that during the 17 days, there were some really beautiful and positive moments that happened. People call them God whispers. You can call them coincidences. You can call them BS if you want to. I don't care. I know what they meant to me. But there were some really extraordinary, unexplainable things that happened during that 17 days that initially I thought were for Sonia. And the more I reflect on it, none of them were. They were for me and for my family to help us get through. And they were truly amazing. And that's one of the ways that I've been inspired to continue to talk about it. One of the ways that I've been able to push through and continue to move on.
What's an example of one?
So the very first one, and this is not the best, but the very first one was the first person Sonia told of her cancer was her sister. They were very, very close. Her sister gave her 3 nephews, Beckett, Adler, and Sayer. And she told her sister. What she didn't tell her sister was, since that Thursday night, me and Sonia adapted a phrase, and we just kept saying, one day at a time, one day at a time. That's it. We'll fight this one day at a time. And it was so repetitive, it was sickening. I think we said it 100 times in a 24-hour period. And it was something that we never really said much. Well, the next day, it's Saturday, her sister messages both me and Sonia a picture. And the caption is, Beckett went out for a walk today and found 2 painted rocks. I don't know if you know, but it's a thing. People will paint rocks and hide them or leave them on the sidewalks, and kids can find them. And Beckett found 2 rocks today. One said love, and the other said one day at a time. So call it a coincidence, but to us, it was a little push to move forward and to fight and to stay one day at a time. Another, and this is an interesting one, but it started around day 6 or day 7 when her hallucinations had first started. We had myself and our nurse, Dina, and then another friend in the hospital room. We were still at the hospital. No real communication with the outside world. We're not texting. We're not calling anybody. And Sonia sits up in her bed and angrily says, who got glitter all over my floor? And we're like, Sonia, there's no glitter. You're in the hospital. There's no glitter on your floor. And she's like, somebody got pink and purple glitter all over my floor and it won't come up. I'm like, okay, Sonia, whatever. The nurses told us at this point, just let her have her hallucinations and ride with them. But she was adamant there was pink and purple glitter all over her floor, and no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't clean it up. Fast forward a few hours later, I step outside to, I think, grab some food, and my neighbor calls me. My neighbor, Michelle, calls me, and she says, Shane, I'm so sorry. And I said, what is it, Michelle? She said, well, me and my daughter were at your house. They were making door signs in honor of Sonia. And she said, we were painting them, and we got pink and purple glitter all over your floor. And we tried to clean it up, but it didn't come up. We're going to get somebody to clean it tomorrow. And I stopped dead in my tracks, and I said, Michelle, what did you say? And she said, I'm sorry, we got pink and purple glitter all over your floor, and it won't come up. And, you know, to me, Sonia being able to see that, it's just another testament of the veil being thin. What is actually being seen, I don't know, but it was comforting to me. And I certainly I think I have about 10 stories I could tell you. It would take 3 hours to tell you all of them, but they were things that were very impactful to me and my family as they happened.
Yeah. I'm actually reading a book right now that it's called Visions of Glory, and it's an experience of a man who flirted with the other side of the veil many times and shares he died 3 separate times and then was essentially, for whatever reason, brought back to life. And he talks about his ability to, in some of those moments, like essentially teleport, like show up in other areas and see things and be there with people and the whole deal. So it's really interesting you say that, because I'm right now reading that book and it resonates a lot. So she was probably, very thinly still with us and had the ability to go see that and then come back and let you guys know what had happened, which is really cool. I want to read something that you wrote, Shane. So this was on June 5th. You said birthdays might have been this girl's favorite day of the year. She loved being spoiled, having all the attention, being with my family, and just celebrating. Her smile says it all. Today, she would have been a very young age of 46 years old. Life is too short. Life is unpredictable. Life is not fair. Life is precious. Life is hard. Life is beautiful. Life is only once. June 5th is one of those days that will always hit a little harder for me. There will be lots of memories, lots of reminders, lots of missing her, and lots of love. That all comes with a few more tears, swallowing hard, upset stomach, mood swings, and wild emotions. I will push through this thinking of you in heaven, knowing that we are thinking of you today and every day, hoping that you got the balloon we sent you this morning. Knowing that you are smiling as you watch over us, and knowing how much love you are getting today. Happy birthday, and I love you always. How do you think that Sonia will be remembered?
She thought she didn't have any friends. She thought that nobody would attend her funeral. And I'll tell you, it was an experience that I had never seen. When we had her remembrance, Theodora Trails Ward very well. We had the entire chapel filled. They opened the curtains. The entire back was filled, and there were standing room only. And that didn't account for the people that were watching on live stream. There were so many people there. And the stories that week, the 17 days, the week between that and her remembrance, and then even after, the amount of people that she touched coming forward to tell me how she touched them and the things that she had done was incredible. To say she lived for her kids is a drastic understatement. She was at literally every single practice, every single game, every single pageant, every single contest, anything the kids had, she was there. She lived for those kids, to the point where Caden played baseball in Texas. He hadn't even played in a game yet. He was a pitcher, so if he did play, he'd only play every 6 games. we flew out for every single home series to support him on the bench. That's who she was.
Yeah.
The amount of parents that came forward and said, do you know that Sonia bought a cheer uniform because we couldn't afford it 2 years ago? Do you know that Sonia sponsored my kid to go to this baseball tournament because, we weren't going to be able to go? We constantly had people. I call it a flop house. We took in so many people. I mean, obviously relatives. I took in my brother at one point, but we had virtually almost strangers that would live in our house because her heart was so big. I actually, when I gave her eulogy, I made a comment to no wonder I go broke, because every time she was at the grocery store and had asked, would you like to round up for this charity?
It's like all the money.
She would give another $1, $2. She was the most giving person. And we're not rich. We weren't always well-to-do, and it didn't matter. If we had it, she'd give it to somebody that needed it more than us.
Yeah.
And to see the 400 plus people that attended her service, to see the amount of, honestly, I've never seen a community pull together and support somebody more. We had the Baisha baseball team that was local high school baseball team that was doing videos and sending it to us. The cheer team was doing a car wash fundraiser. We had friends doing fundraisers. One of the most amazing things, Adora Trails, the community which we lived and you lived, 1,800 plus homes. I think more than half of those homes had pink lights in honor of Sonia. And I had never seen that. And then that extended. As I drove throughout other communities, I started seeing pink lights everywhere throughout February and March. And it was amazing. And that's how she's going to be remembered, as a great mother, as the most giving person you'd ever meet. And that was her.
You think that's how she wants to be remembered?
I think if she had her way, honestly, as long as her kids were by her side, that's what she'd want.
Yeah.
She didn't do any of that for remembrance. She didn't do any of it for glory. She never posted it on social media.
Yeah.
Heck, I didn't know half of the stuff she had done until I found out after she passed away.
Yeah.
She didn't do it to be glorified. She did it because that's who she was.
Yeah.
And I think if that's how people remember her, that's the appropriate way.
I want to read one more thing that you said. You said, I can't explain. This was at our 2-year passing. You said, I can't explain how much you can miss someone. How many memories you hold on to. How you wish things could be different. How I wish she could see the person that I've been over the last 2 years. How I always have room for her in my heart. How much she truly meant to me, even though I didn't show it. How regretful I am that she didn't get the best of me. How sorry I am that I wasn't the person she needed the whole time. And how she still loved me through everything, because that's just who she was. I miss her voice. I miss her smile, her laugh, her attitude, her kiss, her touch, her giving ways. I miss her. What emotions come to mind when you hear that one?
It's one of the biggest struggles that I have since her passing 2.5 years ago is I've become a better man since her passing. And I feel like she invested, we were married 22 years. We were together about 25. And she was with me from day one. I was 18. She was 18. We went through everything together. I was a troubled youth. She pulled me out of that. There was addiction in my family. She helped overcome that. She put up with my entire family. There was adultery in our relationship. There were financial problems. There was a bankruptcy. There were job losses. There were all of these different things. And some of them are normal for relationships, but to have all of them is troubling. We didn't have a perfect marriage, but we were perfect for each other. And I honestly feel that she invested 22 years or 25 years into where I am today, and she doesn't get to reap any of those rewards. And that's hard for me. And I have moved forward. I currently have a girlfriend I've been living with and love her very much. And she's been great and very empathetic and very sympathetic. But I almost feel like my girlfriend benefited from all of the love and the time and the patience that Sonia put into me.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to know that Sonia didn't get that version of me.
Yeah.
And truly in the last 2.5 years, I have changed. My kids see it. I'm not as quick tempered. I'm not as hot headed. I let things slide a lot more. Everybody always says, you only have one life, live it. Until this happened, I didn't understand what that meant. Truly understand what that meant.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's hard. Like I said, the birthdays, the anniversaries, all of the big moments, they're hard. I had a friend that is also a widow. She lost her husband at a young age. And I called to confide in her, and she told me some of the best advice I had heard. And that is, the moments that hit you hardest aren't the days that you expect. You can see those coming. The days that hit you the hardest are the ones like this morning, where I'm preparing for this interview and I'm scrolling through 100 pictures and I see something I'd never seen before.
Yeah.
And I bawl for an hour, or it's late at night and I have a thought of her, or I hear a song, or I see something on TV that reminds me of her, or one of these little God whispers that just remind me of her. And that hits you like a Mike Tyson punch in the mouth. You just can't explain it.
I want to talk about, you made a post a couple of months ago where you said, you basically pleaded with men, I think it was, to do annual mammograms with their daughters, their spouse, their mother, whoever it was, just to check in, just to make sure. And you're also continuing to really be an advocate and a voice for this and what you're doing with 17 days. So maybe just share more about your mission with 17 days, share the importance of this annual mammogram checkup. Like, why do you think that's so important?
So statistically speaking, 1 in 8 women are affected by breast cancer. One in 8 women. Statistically speaking.
Is that global or is that American?
That's global.
Wow.
1 in 8 women.
Wow.
And if you look at the reach, it actually reaches more than 1 in 8 because, breast cancer affected me, my daughter, my 2 daughters, my son, my father-in-law. It affects everyone around you.
Yeah.
So it's 1 in 8 women, but it's really every single person on this earth at some point is going to be affected. The statistics also say that early detection of breast cancer is survivable at 99%.
Wow.
So if you catch it early, 99% chance you're going to have extended life of 3 to 4 years.
What does early mean, by the way?
Early is stage 1.
Yeah.
So anything, first onset.
Which is first few months?
First few months, maybe even the first year.
Yeah.
And I don't know the specifics of that, but I do know early onset, 99% survivability.
Yeah.
I don't play the what if game. Me and my kids don't play that game at all, but I'm also a realist. Sonia had never had a mammogram.
Yeah.
I don't play the what if game, but I also know the truth.
Yeah.
Right. So I plead. And the reason I made that post was actually my girlfriend went to have her annual mammogram, and I went with her, and I'm sitting in the lobby and I see all of these women either walk in with other women or they're completely alone. And I think, man, where are all the guys at? This is affecting them as much as it affects anybody.
Wow.
So I plead.
Look into this camera when you do this, by the way.
Sure.
Tell the audience what's up.
Yeah. Guys, if you love your women, be there for them. They come to every appointment with you. Support them. It's a scary adventure. It's something they don't want to do, but they need to do it. And it truly could be life-saving. Go with them, support them during their mammograms. So that's where the post generated. I actually work closely with a local organization called Impact One that supports women through breast cancer. And they are astonished by the amount of men that leave their wives during breast cancer, that don't support. The divorce rate for breast cancer is ridiculous.
What?
It is eye-opening. And I talked to the founder of that a lot, Elizabeth, and some of the things that she says and the statistics that she has is just eye-opening. So, so I work with her, and I started a platform, 17 Days, after 24 years in the corporate world and chasing the big dreams and, things that had me traveling on the day that my wife goes into the hospital and gets diagnosed 17 days before death. I left that world to do something on my own. And what I chose to do is start 17 Days, which is a platform about speaking of this story, the story of my past, troubled youth, addiction, mental health, everything that comes along with it, and how to maintain some positivity and how to continue to live your life. And, I'm still a positive person. I wake up in the morning and most days I'm happy. I smile, I go do things I want to do, and I truly live life. I'll always have that piece that misses the hell out of Sonia. And, I cry for her, not daily anymore, probably weekly or monthly, but I'll always have that spot for her in her heart. But this is also healing for me too. Creating 17 Days and being on podcasts and writing a book and doing public speaking events. This is healing for me. But also, if I can touch one person that hears one morsel of something that I said and is able to take that and turn it into positivity and help get them through their day, whether it be, a widow, whether it be somebody battling breast cancer or something completely unrelated that's just having a bad time in their life. Like, we're all the same. We all have problems. We all have adversities. We all have challenges, and we're all the same, that we can all overcome them no matter how dark our darkest day gets.
Yeah.
In fact, I tell my kids when they're having a bad day, today is not the worst day of your life. And if you can remember that, you've already lived that, right? And we only get a few worst days of our life. So if you can remember today's not the worst day, that's starts you out with a little bit of positivity right there.
That's really well said. I mean, I think, a lot of the guests that we have on the show have been through deeply traumatic rock bottom days and experiences that the majority of the world, God forbid, will never have to face. And the reason this platform has become what it is because you've got the majority of the world that's suffering with something. They're dealing with something. It could be the loss of a job. It could be my dog died. It could be I stubbed my toe on the couch. Right? We're all dealing with something. But if you can hear your story and where you've gone and the fact that you've made it out and you're just such a positive person and a positive light for the world, it's like, okay, if Shane can do it and go that low and get to where he's at, then so can I with what I'm dealing with. And so I think you said it really well. And it's really the whole purpose behind why I'm doing what I'm doing here. So Shane, if you just in closing, if you just had one more hour to be with her, what would you do? What would you say? What would you ask her? How would you spend that time?
I think about that a lot, and I'm grateful that I had 17 days. Yeah. If your wife is in a car accident, if your wife is in some other tragic accident, or your husband or your son or your daughter, it can happen immediately. Yeah. And you don't have that 17 days. So I'm grateful for that. And during that time, we set time aside for serious conversations. We had plenty of I love yous, more hugs than I think I've ever hugged her, more hand holds than I think I've ever held her hand. And I did that a lot, by the way.
Yeah.
If I had another hour, it would be with me and her 3 kids. Not asking her anything, but just reinforcing how much we love her. And how she shaped not only my 3 kids, but she shaped me. And she'll be eternally rewarded for that. And I think I would have let go of her hand an hour sooner.
Yeah. Well, I think she knows how much you guys love her. Thank you, Shane. It's an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you, Tyler. Appreciate it.
Yeah.